90 jobs evaporated this week at Postmedia, merging newsrooms, contracting out regional coverage, and even consolidating former rivals, such as the Ottawa Citizen and the Ottawa Sun. Why does the news business itself keep making headlines? And what does it say about the capacity of a free press in Canada these days? Let's find out. Joining us now for more in Halifax, Nova Scotia via Skype, there's Kelly Tohill. She's director of the School of Journalism at the University of King's College. And here in studio, Sachi Cole, senior writer at BuzzFeed Canada, and Matt Gurney, columnist for and editor of the National Post comment section, and a guy who does the morning radio on Sirius satellite radio, and I don't think you ever sleep.
This is the middle of my nap time now. It's a huge sacrifice to be here. I'm going to be really tired tonight.
I'm very happy you're awake. We're happy to have you here.
No promises for the rest of the segment.
Okay, Kelly, let's start with you here. Obviously, everybody is troubled to learn when people lose their jobs. That is a terrible situation for those people and their families. But I want to know, aside from that, what your reaction was when you heard the news about Postmedia in terms of what it says about the condition of journalism and newspapering in Canada today.
Well, I think it was a bit of a tipping point in terms of what the role of newspapers are in journalism in Canada. So we lost, some outstanding people lost their jobs. Margot Goodhand is one of the best editors in the country. But I think it's also important to realize that the future of newspapers is really not necessarily the future of journalism in Canada. And their role in our journalism ecosystem is less significant than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think there's a recognition of that diminishing role, and that was really hammered home this week by what happened at Postmedia, and also what happened at Torstar and what's been happening for the last few years.
Matt, I wonder, as a guy who makes his living partially at newspapers, whether it's distressing for you to hear that the future of journalism does not equal the future of newspapers.
No, only because that's something that I think we've made that adjustment for a while now. I mean, newspapers themselves, we think of ourselves as news organizations now. Newsprint is a medium. It is not the totality of our identity. It's a disproportionate part of our identity. It's still where most of the revenue comes from. But, try to find me a newspaper that doesn't have a website, that doesn't have an app, that isn't experimenting in these other ventures. We're trying to find ways to do things. And I suspect, Steve, that we're going to have an era where newspapers as a term will hold over to refer to news organizations after, long since we've actually stopped knocking down trees to actually do the job. But I mean, there's no denying the fact that compared to the disproportionate strength we would have held a generation or two ago, we're not quite as strong as we used to be. We'd like to come fighting back, but look, the challenges are what they are, and they're real.
And let's just stress, you're here speaking on your behalf. You're not a corporate spokesperson for Postmedia or anything like that.
No, we are changing job titles frequently, but that one has not been put on me yet. I'm speaking on my own behalf.
I preface that because I'm going to ask you sort of a corporate question here, and that is, Postmedia bought the Sun Media chain not that long ago. I mean, it was a year ago or so, right? Okay, so as far as you know, was this always part of the plan?
I don't know. That is discussed above my level. I mean, just on the foot soldier level, when this happened, we looked at it and I think we understood, particularly in the cities where there were a Sun and a Postmedia Metro operating at the same time. I think we knew there would be some combination of resources. And I mean, the easy ones, for instance, were maybe HR support, distribution, customer service, things like that. There were things we looked at right away and said, that's for sure going to happen. The question was how much editorial sharing there was going to be. And for me and mine, it was a question. We didn't know. And then it got to the point where I viewed it with some excitement. I mean, there are some great people, the Toronto Sun and National Post headquartered in Toronto. I was like, I would love to get that reporter actually covering something in my pages. That would be fantastic. The direction it's gone in, I'm not going to say I'm shocked by it. I confess to being a little bit surprised, at least compared to how I felt a year ago, that it moved as quickly and as aggressively as it happened.
Okay, Sachi, let me get your view from the opposite side of the coin. You're not somebody who makes their living in mainstream media or old-style newspapers. You're in new media. So how did you react when you heard the news?
Apparently the internet, which has been around for 2 decades, is still considered new media.
Well, BuzzFeed's pretty new.
I guess in theory. I mean, newspapers are not going to work for much longer. I think we're seeing that they're not really working now, and that's because they don't adapt. It's just the nature of that particular medium, and it doesn't mean that the content can't then live on the internet where it would adapt and it would change and it does develop. But having any romantic feelings about the paper, I don't think will get you anything, and I don't think it benefits. So yeah, I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's when.
Kelly, is it fair to say that newspapers have been super slow to adapt to the new realities?
No, I I don't really think that's fair to say that they've been slow. I think that they are hobbled by their long history of processes and cultures. So if you look at the work of somebody like Clayton Christensen, who looks at disruptive innovation, almost no industry has been able to adapt to a paradigm shifting technology. You know, if trains had figured out that their job was to deliver people from point A to point B, they might have become airline companies. So newspapers are, although they have been trying to migrate over to digital, it's the digital first organizations that I think have a much better chance of moving into that space and surviving.
Matt, I'd like your reaction to something I'm going to read here, because I gather after the changes at Postmedia, there are now going to be sort of 2 newspapers in one city in some of the places, but 1 newsroom servicing both newspapers. And reporters are going to file their stories, I guess, and then editors at respective papers will put that in the respective voices of the cultures of each newspaper to suit that tone. Wab Kinew, author, journalist, reacted to that when he heard about it, and he tweeted, "I'd think twice about giving an interview to Postmedia now because comments may be presented out of context." Is he right to be concerned about that?
I don't know if he's any more right than he would have been before, because everything that would go in a newspaper or whatever newsroom it's originating from would go through a writing process and then an editing process, and then it can be trimmed on the page, and then it can be copy edited. The danger was always there for that. We try to keep it to a minimum, but it can happen. We will use good editors for that. I can't promise you it will be a seamless process. I'm given to understand that it's going to be rather a bumpy one, in fact. That would not be where my concerns would lie. I mean, I think a point that's been raised already is cultures are a newsroom issue. That's where I would look to see bumps, not quotation issues. And let's face it, I mean, it's not like we haven't been accused of, I mean, as newspapers in general have long been accused of taking quotes out of context. That will continue much as it ever was, I suspect.
Sachi, is this a problem, do you think, in the making?
I think it was before. I don't think it's a new problem, but I think it's one that now you can really notice. And I'm sure there will be something that will happen that will make people panic. And yeah, I think it's not new.
Matt, we need a little background here, because from what I'm told, the Postmedia newspapers actually do okay. Like they break even, they may even make some money. But your organization rather, is just carrying an enormous amount of debt.
Yeah.
Tell everybody how that happened.
Well, wow. Okay. I mean, how many hours do you want to give me? Let me boil this down as quickly as I can. Postmedia exists today because it was constituted out of the ashes of the former CanWest newspaper holdings. They went bankrupt about 6 years ago now. There were television assets, there were newspaper assets. The television assets became Shaw Media, which has itself recently been purchased, so that's another aspect of the media story. The newspaper assets became Postmedia, put together by a consortium led by Paul Godfrey, our continuing president and CEO, backed by investors, and those investors lent the company money. Since then, the company has taken on more debt, recently a considerable amount, to acquire the Sun Media properties. That's where the debt comes from. The plan was always the hope was always to maintain profitability, to reduce expenses, hopefully to expand profitability, or at least to break even with the downward trend in our traditional revenue sources while developing new ones. Revenue has fallen in print faster than expected. Digital growth has been slower than hoped for, and in recent years it's actually moved backwards a little bit, which is certainly something that's been discouraging to us, but does speak to the broader point of new media being more adaptable in that sense. So we find ourselves, and this is a problem facing every newspaper in North America more or less, with a declining revenue stream and a fairly significant debt load. Postmedia, unfortunately, is also in a position where some of that debt is owed in US dollars. That leaves us vulnerable to currency fluctuations.
Let me follow up on that. Kelly, should we be distressed about the fact that apparently it's American hedge funds that own Postmedia as opposed to domestic ownership? Is that a problem for you?
I think it's kind of a comfortable scapegoat, actually. Newspapers all over are in really deep trouble, and Postmedia may have some more troubles because they have so much debt. But asking a hedge fund not to act like a hedge fund is more than naive. Would they be in better shape if that sale hadn't been allowed or that investment hadn't been allowed? Potentially. But that's not the core problem. The core problem is that they've had a revenue slide every quarter since 2009.
Steve, if I can just insert for 1 second here, just sorry to hijack your show. If not for the debt 6 years ago, not for the investment, the assembly of Postmedia, I don't know if we exist now. And I can't prove a negative, right? There may have been another group that came along and bought us, but at the time, the group that was put together with the debt is what allowed Postmedia to exist. Could someone else have come along Maybe, who knows? In some alternate universe, you and I might be having a very different conversation right now.
So we shouldn't demonize this U.S. hedge fund because without them, there might be nothing.
I leave it up to individuals to decide who they demonize. I just simply point out we probably don't exist without the debt.
Okay. Sachi, I want to raise, let's put up this other tweet here, Sheldon, shall we? This is Nora Loretto, labor activist and writer, said, cuts at Postmedia are more about how capitalism works than about whether or not journalism is sustainable. Is she onto something there?
Yeah, I mean, the people to blame for this is not the industry. It's the people who are actually to blame for this. So if you want to have, I know that you want to let people choose who to demonize. I'm going to choose Paul Godfrey because that's who I think you should blame for this. I don't think that what's happening at the Post is necessarily indicative of the entire industry. And there was a lot of people talking about when you look at the cuts, this is proof that you shouldn't enter journalism and you shouldn't go to journalism school and journalism schools should accept fewer people. I don't think that's the solution because that tells different voices, younger people, diverse people to not enter the industry, which is a terrible idea. What it tells us is that this is a company that has been managed in a way that is functioning like a company. They don't really care about the people who work there. I don't think that they do. They're trying to look the best as possible. They're going to sell off for parts, and then one day they're going to not exist. And that's what they're trying to do. So how can I say that this one company is an indication of the entire industry? It's not. It's just a really crumbly run company.
Okay, Matt, I got to give you equal time on that one, then I want to hear Kelly on that as well.
People have been critical of Postmedia management for any numbers of reasons. Some of the concerns may be legitimate. We could probably debate all of them and have excellent conversations. None of the criticisms I've heard of late actually address the fundamental issue, which is the debt and the revenue. And there's any number of conversations we can have, and they all matter in terms of journalism ethics. They matter in terms of journalism practice, and even just the behind-the-scenes sausage-making part of journalism. But right now, I'm not worried about Paul Godfrey. I'm not worried about Postmedia. I'm worried about mathematics. I mean, this is a declining revenue base and a growing debt base at the same time. We, as an industry, as a company, we have any number of issues. Right now, there's one that worries me more than the other. And again, people have certainly been critical of Paul Godfrey. I simply say this, Steve, I have a very vivid imagination. I have never been able to imagine a hypothetical corporate leader that fundamentally bends the trajectory of this thing. I mean, you can make changes around the margins. We end up in a similar situation to where we are, a very challenging place, not hopeless, but certainly very challenging. We might get there a little bit sooner, a little bit later. The forces behind us are external, and we haven't always helped them perhaps internally, but I don't think we've changed them by much.
Kelly, your view on this?
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the things is that the actual number of journalism jobs hasn't actually changed much. If you look at the last two StatsCan surveys, the numbers are almost absolutely frozen. So jobs in traditional media are dropping out, but there are also lots of new jobs that are coming on. So our graduates are finding jobs at BuzzFeed, at Vice, at local startups, different nature of journalism, but frankly, pretty damned exciting. So, again, to look at what's happening to the kinds of companies that where I spent my career is really not a fair judge of what's happening in journalism.
Well, you spent many years at the Toronto Star, which is where you and I first met, and I wonder whether or not any of your students on any occasion come to you and say, Professor Tohill, what the heck am I doing with my life, wasting my time in your courses when there's going to be no media to graduate out of here and work in anyway? Do you get that?
Well, actually, I get that from people outside journalism a lot. Our graduates are doing really well. We actually have lots of graduates at the Star as well. But as I said, a lot of our graduates are going into other kinds of journalism enterprises. So here in Halifax, we have a pretty interesting ecosystem. The local paper is probably going to be, the workers are going to be locked out tomorrow. But we have 5 or 6 other sustainable, thriving local news operations that matter, that count, that are taking our grads. So yeah, people do say, hey, wait a minute, why would people be going into journalism? And what we say is, well, 1, journalism's changed. There are jobs out there. And 2, we also don't train just for journalism. Our last premier was one of our grads too.
Okay. Sachi, can you make a living in this new world of journalism now?
I'm doing great.
You are.
I'm doing fantastic.
Can we just ask a little bit about you?
Okay.
You're 24 years old.
Yes.
You got a great gig
Sure.
at a sort of a big name outfit now.
Yeah, I'm like an
BuzzFeed's
internet teen. It's going great.
Uh-huh. I guess the question is, had you graduated sort of a quarter century ago, and entered into that media market?
Yeah, I think if I graduated a quarter century ago as a non-white female, I think I would have had a very different scene. So I don't think about it in that way.
Meaning what?
I don't think I would have the job that I have.
Because it was too much of a closed shop back then?
Yeah, I think it's a closed shop now. It's not that open. Might feel that way because we talk about it more, but it's not that much open.
Do you think, as you look at it now, that the mainstream media are innovating quickly enough in order to adapt to the new realities that they're involved in?
No, but I don't know how to solve that problem either. I'm here to present problems. I don't really have solutions for them, but I feel like my solution would be to be a website, is to be a web-first product. That would be my solution.
Is that where it's going, Matt?
It's web or something online. I mean, people are trying out new things all the time. I don't have the answers either. I wish I did. If I did, I'd be consulting somewhere for quadrillions of dollars. But it will be something digital. It'll be something faster than what we have. I believe some of the traditional media organizations will successfully transition to what's coming. I don't think we'll all fail. I have no idea which ones it will be. We're all trying different strategies. I like to be an optimist. I think one of them, maybe more, will work, and then we'll see what happens. But I mean, Steve, I've joked with you about this before. I love e-reading because I have terrible eyesight. And I look at that as I can bump up the text, I can enjoy this. There is going to be a whole new generation of people my age, a little bit younger, who are going to grow up and they are going to romanticize, as has already been said, the print media edition. So something will come out of this. And I also think the newspaper model makes a certain amount of sense in terms of an aggregated area of writers and editors, people who have different expertise, people who have general interest. So I think the model, in a very basic sense of what a newspaper is, will endure or at least resurrect. But how we distribute it will change.
Kelly, here's what I don't get. If you can only charge, let's say, 10% of the cost of a print ad for online, if we're all moving to an online world, how exactly does that sustain the number of jobs, the kind of quality, the kind of revenues you need to run a good company in the media business?
Well, a couple of things. For one thing, printing is very expensive. So if you're not printing, you don't need as much money. That's just a base. But the other thing is that all journalism really is moving into niche products. So in many ways, you know, the contemporary newspaper was based on putting together as many eyeballs as you could and selling those to advertisers, and advertisers now want a much more targeted market. So that's one of the fundamental problems with urban dailies, even separate from the internet. So that's why the titles that are tightly segmented, that really go after a very specific audience, those are the ones that are working. And they work by both people are willing to pay for them, the actual readers are willing to pay for that content, and the advertisers get, you know, exactly the audience they want. So they're willing to pay for it too. It's a very different model than let's go out and sell this paper for less than it actually costs to produce, because advertisers want, you know, 400,000 eyeballs on a Saturday morning.
I think Jonathan Kay may agree with you, because he wrote a piece. You know Jonathan, obviously, writes with the National Post, used to work there, now he's running the Walrus magazine, or he's the editor-in-chief, I guess, of the Walrus. And here's what he had to say about this. There will be plenty of mass-produced, ad-financed, low-quality content to be found at the cheap business insidery end of the content spectrum. And there will also be people like me and my Walrus colleagues creating quality content at the charitably financed top end. But betwixt and between, call it post-media land, where the content is not quite good enough to attract donations from high-minded donors, nor vulgar enough to qualify as viral clickbait, the business model has evaporated. In the modern media market, go low or go high. Hanging out in the middle of the road will put you on the path to corporate extinction. John's a good writer, isn't he? John knows how to write.
He is. I wish he hadn't invented the term post-media land. I'm going to have to take that one up with him. The one thing I would say that, I mean, he said something very specific in there that I would actually take objection to. And in our personal emails, I did take objection to, for the record, because as you know, we are friends. I don't agree it has to be charitable. There are other ways to finance journalism that don't quite rise to the level of donation. We've already talked about niche markets, hyper-specialization. There are people who will subscribe to things that precisely fit what they are interested in. Can you sustain an entire general readership local newspaper on that? I don't know. Can you sustain a general specific outlet covering an area or a field? Maybe. Can you cover something that's hyper-specific? I think you can. I was reading recently an article that came out of a magazine that is not just related to aviation. It's not just related to the Air Force, military aviation. It's related to Air Force engines. there is an entire magazine with a staff that focuses on this, and I would imagine it's only industry insiders and fanatically keen followers who would read this sort of thing.
And it floats?
But it exists. And, you know, I had years ago someone tell me, I don't know why you newspaper types are complaining. I mean, journalism's great. I run a magazine. I have incredible advertising. I asked him what he did. He did specific steel pipe valves for steam-driven equipment. And he has a magazine. It's published once a month. Readership was off the charts. Ad revenues were high. That's a kind of journalism, I guess. So there will be ways of finding advertising revenue for specific things. Charitable donations may well be one of them. I don't think it has to be the only option.
Well, let me ask about BuzzFeed. Go ahead, Kelly.
I just wanted to add one thing on that point. There was a study out of Harvard and even labs last month that found that reporters in the U.S. Senate press gallery, that digital and niche publications now far outnumbered reporters for daily newspapers in the U.S.
Do you regret that?
Covering the Senate.
Do you regret that?
It's reality. I try not to regret reality. I love newspapers. I spent my life in them. I'll miss them. But it's not the end of the world or the end of democracy or the end of journalism.
And Steve, I should mention, the Air Force Engine magazine I was reading was covering the United States Congress because they were worried about the F-35. That's exactly what it was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, you're sort of, never mind you personally, you corporately are the new kids on the block in as much as BuzzFeed is, I guess, what John Kay was referring to as the, are you the vulgar end of clickbait or whatever the heck it's called? Okay.
Beautiful, so poetic.
You guys are profitable?
Yeah.
You're profitable?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I don't work on,
What's the business model that makes it work for you guys?
Oh, I mean, we have ads on the site,
And that's
also
it.
we have interesting content. I don't know why complaining about clickbait is the most boring argument to me in the world, because that's what people want to read. So it's not clickbait; it's stuff that you might be interested in.
Nobody has to pay anything to read BuzzFeed.
No, you just go to the website.
But you do have what they call sponsored content now.
Yeah, which are clearly marked as ads. Yeah.
And that's the model.
Yeah.
And it's working.
And then some of the stuff is short and it's lists and it's cute, and some of the stuff is long form or reported or essays. So if you look at the site, you do actually get a broad range. So it isn't just what John very simply dismisses as vulgar clickbait, which I'm changing my business cards to say that, because that is just such perfect nonsense.
In fairness, he says it's not vulgar enough to qualify as viral clickbait.
Oh, but he's saying that they're not, right?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody is.
Somebody has to be that.
Yeah.
Which maybe it's me.
You want to give me 7 reasons why BuzzFeed is such a wonderful place to work?
No, I don't.
No. Okay.
No.
That was too easy.
Yeah.
Let's finish. We've got a few minutes left here. Here's Chantal Hébert in the Toronto Star, January 21st. Under the guise of a migration to the digital world, Canada's news media is undergoing the biggest journalistic fire sale of its history. It is taking place on such a scale that it might be more appropriate to call it a liquidation of information gathering resources, and it is happening under the nose of a political class that is, for the most part, content to look the other way. So let's get into this. Kelly, this is a massive transformation of the industry that you and I have known and understood for 40 years. Does the public care what's happening?
I don't know. I don't know if the public cares. I guess that still remains to be seen. The sad truth is the kind of journalism that you and I care about most has never had a business model that supported it on its own. It's always been wrapped in, supported by advertising and required horoscopes and crosswords and other things in order to survive. And the fragmentation of media, it now puts it in a very difficult and different position.
Sachi, what's your sense about where the Canadian public is on this?
I think they care if they have a local newspaper, and I think local journalism is important, and that's sort of the thing that gets lost in these layoffs, I think, the most. So yeah, if you live in a city where the cuts are really going to hit you, I am, your Toronto downtown elite garbage person, so like it doesn't really affect me that much, but I'm sure for my parents who live in Calgary, yeah, it matters. I think
Toronto downtown elite are people too, aren't they?
Yeah, they're just, I thought we were all terrible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I do wonder about the CHCH TV. People used to rely on that Hamilton radio station, TV station rather, to get their news.
That's why I liked Chantal Hébert's piece, because it wasn't just talking about newspapers. I appreciated somebody else getting the attention for a couple of minutes, but it was a broader piece about radio. We've seen Bell merging their radio networks recently. Chorus, which just bought out Shaw, owns a lot of radio stations. I'm sure they'll find synergies there too. It's about TV stations. CHCH being an example. This is a challenge everywhere. And Steve, to the big question, do people care? Yes. Do they care enough to help us? I don't know.
To be continued. Thanks, everybody, for this great discussion tonight here on TVO. Sachi Cole and Matt Gurney from BuzzFeed Canada and the National Post, respectively, and Kelly Tohill, the director of the School of Journalism at the University of King's College in Halifax. Appreciate your time tonight, everybody.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.